A father, a little girl, and a loyal German shepherd standing at the edge of the sea in the middle of winter, three souls who have already survived a storm no one else could see. The waves whisper secrets of love, loss, and something divine. Because sometimes God's miracles don't come with lightning, they come with healing, forgiveness, and a second chance at home. Before we begin, take a deep breath and think about this. Where are you watching from today? Tell us in the comments below, and may this story bring a little warmth to your heart. Have a blessed and peaceful day ahead. The wind rolled down from the Cascade Mountains like a whisper made of frost, brushing over the pine trees that circled the small town of Pine Hollow, Oregon. Dusk settled in soft amber layers, and the rain that had been falling all afternoon finally turned to mist. A black patrol SUV crawled up the gravel road leading to a large two-story cabin sitting on the edge of the woods. Inside the car, Officer Ethan Cole drove in silence, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the narrow path ahead. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence once filled a room without words. His hair, once golden, had darkened under years of stress and grief. His blue-gray eyes were tired, the color of winter skies before a storm. He carried the weight of loss like an old wound, the kind that healed but never stopped aching. Ethan had been a police officer for 16 years, known in the county for his calm under pressure. He'd been decorated twice, once for saving a child from a flood, once for talking a desperate veteran out of suicide. Yet none of those moments felt like victories. His wife, Grace, had died in a car accident 4 years ago, a night he still replayed in dreams. The call he didn't answer, the rain-soaked road, the empty passenger seat. Since then, Ethan's life had been divided in two, before and after Grace. Beside him sat Lila, his 8-year-old daughter. She was small for her age, her brown hair hanging in uneven waves as if she had cut it herself. Her wide hazel eyes seemed to hold too much for a child, too much silence, too much knowing. She hugged a worn, stuffed rabbit against her chest and watched the trees glide by like ghosts. Since her mother's death, she had stopped talking as much, replaced words with long stares and the kind of quiet that made grown men uneasy. In the back seat lay Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat and intelligent amber eyes. His ears were scarred at the tips, one slightly bent from an old wound, a remnant from his years as Ethan's K-9 partner. Ranger had been retired after taking shrapnel in a drug raid 2 years prior, but his loyalty hadn't dimmed. He was more than a pet. He was a sentinel, watchful, disciplined, yet tender with Lila, whom he followed everywhere like a living shadow. The SUV stopped before the house, a tall structure built of cedar and stone, its windows glowing faintly in the fog. "We're home," Ethan said softly, though the word didn't sound right. The cabin had belonged to Rebecca Hale, the woman he'd married 3 days ago in a quiet ceremony attended only by a few colleagues. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Rebecca stepped out from the porch to greet them, her figure framed by the warm golden light inside. She was in her early 30s, slender, poised, with dark auburn hair that fell perfectly down her back. Her features were striking, sharp cheekbones, eyes, the color of polished amber, and her smile practiced, the kind that looked sincere even when it wasn't. She worked as an interior designer, known for her meticulous taste and her control over every detail. People called her charming. Ethan called her orderly, but underneath that composure lay a subtle chill, like marble left too long in the rain. "Welcome home," she said, voice smooth as silk. She crouched, smiling at Lila. "You must be tired, sweetheart. Come in. Let's get you something warm." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes didn't soften. Lila clutched her rabbit tighter and nodded without speaking. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and lemon oil. The furniture gleamed with polish, the floors spotless. Rebecca moved with the precision of someone curating a museum. On the mantel hung framed photos from their wedding, Rebecca in ivory lace, Ethan in his uniform, smiling stiffly. There were no signs of Grace, no trace of the woman whose laughter once filled their old home. Ethan noticed the emptiness, but said nothing. Rebecca guided Lila to her new room upstairs, a neatly arranged space with white curtains, pale blue sheets, and a small desk by the window. I decorated it myself, she said proudly. Fresh, simple, clean. You like it? Lila glanced around and gave a tiny nod, but her eyes drifted to the box Ranger had nudged in, a worn wooden chest containing her mother's photo and a few drawings. Rebecca's gaze followed, her smile tightening just slightly. Downstairs, Ethan unloaded the boxes while the wind whistled through the chimney. He stopped at one labeled Grace's things. He hesitated before carrying it inside. Rebecca's voice floated from the hallway. "Oh, darling, maybe we shouldn't keep all those old things around. It'll make it harder for her to move on." Ethan looked up. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, expression soft but insistent. "Just for now," he said quietly, "until she settles in." Rebecca nodded, her lips curving into what looked like understanding, but when she turned away, her eyes hardened. That evening, rain began again, tapping the windows in restless rhythm. Lila sat at the dinner table, silent, pushing mashed potatoes across her plate. Rebecca talked about reorganizing the living room, changing curtains, repainting walls. Ethan tried to listen, tried to smile. "You'll love it here," Rebecca said, pouring him wine. "The woods are peaceful. The air is pure. It's the kind of place where everything unwanted disappears." Her eyes flicked toward the window, where Ranger lay curled on the porch, watching through the glass. Later, as the clock neared midnight, Ethan checked on Lila. She was asleep, her small hand resting on Ranger's fur. The dog's eyes were half open, ears twitching at every sound. Ethan smiled faintly and stroked Ranger's head. "Good boy. Watch over her," he murmured. Ranger gave a soft huff in response. Downstairs, Rebecca stood by the fireplace, a glass of red wine in her hand. The firelight shimmered across her face, catching the faint smile that curved her lips, not the kind of smile meant for anyone else to see. She walked to the mantel, ran a finger along one of the photos, and stopped at the frame that held Grace's picture, a simple photograph of a woman laughing under sunlight, hair tangled by wind. Rebecca stared at it for a moment, then turned her head slightly. "It's time to move on," she whispered. When Ethan came down moments later, she was already tidying the shelves, cheerful as ever. "Just adjusting things," she said lightly. "The house needs my touch." He nodded, distracted. But as he turned to lock the front door, his eyes caught the mantel again, and Grace's picture was gone. Outside, the mist thickened into rain. The trees swayed as if whispering warnings to one another. Ranger lifted his head suddenly, ears pricking, eyes narrowing at the faint sound coming from the woods. A snapping twig, too deliberate to be the wind. He stood, tail stiff, and growled low. Upstairs, Lila stirred in her sleep, whispering softly, "Mom." Ethan, hearing the faint growl through the rain, stepped outside with a flashlight. "Ranger?" The beam cut through the mist, revealing only trees dripping with water. The dog barked once, short and sharp. Ethan turned the light toward the forest's edge, his pulse rising. But there was nothing, only the reflection of his own beam in a puddle. "Probably deer," he muttered. Still, as he turned back to the house, a shadow moved behind one of the trees, silent and watching. When he returned, Rebecca was standing by the window, arms crossed. "You shouldn't go out like that," she said softly. "It's dangerous. There are things in these woods that don't belong." Her tone was gentle, but something in it made him pause. "Like what?" he asked. She smiled. "Old memories. Ghosts. Take your pick." Ethan shook off the unease, kissed her cheek, and went upstairs. As he closed the bedroom door, Rebecca's reflection lingered in the dark glass of the window, her eyes open, awake, unblinking. Downstairs, Ranger didn't sleep. He sat by the door all night, ears twitching, nose tilted toward the stairs where Rebecca's scent hung faintly in the air, lavender and something colder underneath. When the clock struck 3, he let out a low growl that trembled through the silent house. The new home was beautiful, yes, but as the rain whispered through the pine trees, the house seemed to breathe, not with warmth, but with something that waited. Morning arrived gray and quiet over Pine Hollow. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, leaving droplets clinging to the window panes like tears that refused to fall. The forest beyond the cabin shimmered faintly under a veil of mist. Inside, the house was awake but hushed, the kind of silence that felt arranged, deliberate. Rebecca Hale moved through it like a conductor in a slow, measured symphony. She wore a cream-colored sweater, her hair tied neatly in a low twist, and her movements were as precise as clockwork. Every drawer she opened, every step she took seemed to have a purpose. She wasn't just tidying, she was composing order. Ethan had left early for duty at the Pine Hollow Police Department, leaving behind the low hum of his coffee maker and the faint smell of his aftershave. He had kissed Rebecca on the cheek, unaware of how her eyes followed him until the car disappeared behind the trees. Now the house belonged entirely to her. Rebecca stood before the refrigerator, taping a sheet of paper to its white surface. Across the top, in delicate handwriting, were the words, "Family Guidelines." Beneath, a list stretched neatly down the page. No loud noises after 8, no running in the house, no leaving toys in the living room. Speak respectfully. Do not mention the past. She stepped back and admired her work, smiling faintly as though she had just hung an art piece. Lila came into the kitchen in her pajamas, her small feet silent against the polished wood. Her hair was tangled, eyes still heavy with sleep. She hesitated when she saw Rebecca, clutching her stuffed rabbit against her chest. "Good morning," Rebecca said warmly, turning with a plate of toast in her hand. "Did you sleep well, sweetheart?" Lila nodded, but didn't speak. "That's good," Rebecca continued, placing the plate on the table. "I made breakfast. Toast and milk, simple is best for growing girls." As Lila sat down, she noticed the list on the fridge. Her lips parted slightly as she read the words. "Is that for me?" she asked, voice small. Rebecca smiled, though her tone was as smooth as the marble counters. "It's for all of us, dear. Every good family needs rules to stay peaceful." Lila looked down at her toast, picking at its edge. "But Dad never—" "Your father works very hard," Rebecca interrupted gently. "He needs peace when he's home. You understand that, don't you?" Outside, Ranger stood by the porch, his fur glistening with mist. He was watching through the glass door, amber eyes sharp, ears perked toward the faint tremor in Lila's voice. When Rebecca turned her back, Lila reached down and brushed crumbs toward the floor. Ranger trotted in, licking them up before she could be scolded. For a brief moment, Lila smiled, the first flicker of light in the morning gloom. Rebecca turned just in time to see the dog near her spotless kitchen tiles. Her expression stiffened. "Ranger," she said. Softly, her voice dipped in sugar yet laced with warning. "Outside, please." The shepherd froze, eyes flicking to Lila, then padded slowly toward the door. When he stepped out, Rebecca's hand pressed the latch with a soft click. The sound of the lock was almost imperceptible, but Lila's shoulders tensed. By afternoon, the drizzle had stopped. The house smelled faintly of lavender again. Rebecca spent hours rearranging things, moving furniture by an inch, aligning frames, replacing old curtains with pale beige ones. She hummed as she worked, her voice light but distant. Lila followed her silently, carrying a small notebook Grace had once given her. She wanted to draw, but Rebecca said, "Maybe later. Let's finish organizing first." It was nearly noon when a new figure appeared at the front door. A woman in her 50s, dressed in a plain blue cardigan and gray skirt, stepped inside holding a grocery bag. Her silver hair was pinned back, and her warm brown eyes carried the tired gentleness of someone who had worked too many years in the same house. "Morning, Mrs. Hale," she said politely. "I brought some fresh bread from town." Rebecca looked up, smiling with polite restraint. "Ah, you must be Linda." "Yes, ma'am." Linda Foster had been with the Cole family for over a decade, a housekeeper who'd stayed on even after Grace's death. She had seen Lila grow from a giggling baby to a silent little girl, and her affection for the child was quiet but deep. Rebecca wiped her hands on a cloth. "I appreciate your help, Linda. I do like things clean and simple." Her tone was kind, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of authority, as if she were testing the boundaries of ownership. Linda nodded, used to such tones. "Of course, ma'am." When Lila ran to greet her, Linda knelt and smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart. How are you holding up?" Lila's eyes brightened a little. "I'm okay." Ranger found a frog by the fence this morning. Rebecca's brows lifted slightly. A frog? She said, amused in a way that wasn't quite genuine. Let's make sure it stays outside, We wouldn't want the floors dirty. Linda's smile faded as she sensed the shift. She stood, smoothing her cardigan. Yes, ma'am. I'll be careful. By late afternoon, the clouds began to clear and sunlight spilled through the living room windows. Rebecca decided it was time for tea. Linda, she called, let's use the white porcelain set, the one from the top shelf. As the older woman arranged the table, Rebecca sat near the fireplace, flipping through a home decor magazine. Lila sat quietly on the rug beside Ranger, who had returned inside after Ethan called home to check on them. The dog rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed but alert. Sweetheart, Rebecca said suddenly, don't sit on the floor. It's cold. Use the chair. I like it. Here, Lila whispered. Rebecca's smile faltered. Chairs are for people, darling. Floors are for pets. Ranger lifted his head at her tone, ears flattening slightly. It's all right, Lila said quickly, hugging him tighter. He's not. Enough, Rebecca interrupted gently, her words floating like feathers but landing like stones. We'll have proper manners in this house. Linda hesitated near the teapot, her hands tightening on the handle. Ethan had once told her Rebecca was refined. She now understood that refined could sometimes mean unyielding. When Ethan returned home that evening, the house gleamed as if frozen in a photograph. Rebecca greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, her face the very image of calm. You wouldn't believe how well Lila behaved today, she said. She's such a polite little girl. Ethan smiled, glancing toward his daughter, who sat quietly on the couch beside Ranger. That's good to hear, he said, relief softening his features. Maybe this move really is helping. Rebecca's hand slid along his arm. It will, darling. She just needs a bit of structure. As Ethan went upstairs to change, Rebecca turned to Linda. Oh, and please remember, she said softly, no opening the windows too wide. The sunlight fades the wood. And don't let Lila wander through the living room when I'm not here. I like to keep it spotless. Linda's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Worry, perhaps, or quiet resistance. Yes, ma'am, she said. That night, Lila lay awake in bed. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, painting silver bars across the floor. Ranger lay at the foot of her bed, his breathing steady. Downstairs, Rebecca's footsteps passed lightly across the living room floor, measured and soft. The faint sound of a door closing echoed through the hall, the sound of the lock on the porch door, perhaps, or something else. Lila turned toward Ranger and whispered, Do you think she likes us? The dog didn't move but opened one eye, its golden gleam catching the moonlight. He let out a low, almost thoughtful sound, like a sigh. Outside, the mist had returned, crawling through the trees. The house stood quiet, almost peaceful, almost. And inside its walls, new rules had begun to take root, invisible but growing like vines beneath the paint. The days that followed bled together like pale watercolors under steady rain. The house on Pine Hollow Road had fallen into a rhythm, quiet, precise, almost sterile. Rebecca Hale's touch was everywhere, the lavender scent that clung to every room, the constant gleam of polished wood, the way even the ticking of the clock seemed to obey her. It might have been beautiful to anyone else, but to Lila, it felt like a museum for ghosts. On Monday morning, Ethan Cole stood in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting his uniform collar. His reflection looked solid, tidy, disciplined, calm, but the man behind it was anything but. He hadn't been sleeping well. Strange dreams visited him each night. Grace's voice calling his name from another room, the echo of her laughter fading into silence. He wanted to believe Rebecca's words that moving forward meant healing, yet every time he looked at his daughter's face, he saw the same quiet sadness that haunted his own. Rebecca appeared behind him, her figure reflected in the glass. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and her smile was perfect, gentle yet deliberate. "You're thinking too much again," she said softly, straightening his tie. "It's just work, not war." Ethan smiled faintly. "It feels like both sometimes." "Then you need peace here at least. she replied. Her hand brushed the badge on his chest, fingers lingering a second too long. Let me take care of that. She turned and placed his lunch on the counter, packed neatly in a navy bag. Everything she did was exact, every gesture rehearsed. Lila wandered in, wearing her small denim jacket and clutching her notebook. Her hair had been brushed neatly by Linda, who stood nearby with a towel over her shoulder. "Morning, sweetheart," Ethan said, crouching down. "Ready for school?" She nodded shyly. "I drew something," she said, holding out the notebook. Ethan opened it. Inside was a sketch of him in uniform, standing next to Ranger under a cloudy sky. He smiled, his chest tightening with pride. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Rebecca leaned over his shoulder, her voice calm. "That's very sweet, dear. But maybe next time, draw something brighter. Clouds make things gloomy." Lila hesitated, her eyes dimming. Ethan glanced at Rebecca, unsure if she meant harm, but she was already pouring coffee as if nothing had been said. After breakfast, Ethan left for work, driving down the wet road until the house vanished behind mist. Rebecca stood at the window, arms folded loosely. "Linda," she said, "I'll handle things upstairs today. Focus on the kitchen." "Yes, ma'am," Linda replied, though her tone carried quiet unease. As Rebecca moved through the hallway, her steps were measured, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She paused by Grace's old room, the one that had been locked since the first week. The key hung around her neck like a charm, small and gold. She ran her fingers over it briefly, then smiled to herself before walking on. Lila sat on the stairs, sketching in her notebook. The sound of Rebecca's footsteps made her shrink slightly, pressing the pencil harder to the page. When Rebecca reached her, she crouched beside the girl. "What are you drawing this time?" Lila hesitated. "Mom," she said softly. Rebecca's lips curved, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Your father doesn't like it when you dwell on the past, sweetheart. It hurts him. You don't want to hurt him, do you?" Lila shook her head. "Good girl." Rebecca stood and smoothed her skirt, gliding away as the child erased the outline she had begun. The sound of the eraser scratching paper echoed faintly through the hall, and Ranger, lying nearby, lifted his head. His golden eyes followed Rebecca until she disappeared around the corner. That afternoon, the sky turned silver. Rain threatened again, but held back, as though waiting. Rebecca spent hours rearranging the study, sorting through Ethan's papers. When she found an envelope marked Grace, personal, she stared at it for a long time before slipping it quietly into a drawer. Then she picked up the phone. "Yes," she said, her tone shifting to something softer, lighter. "It's fine. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. Just a little more time." Her voice carried through the vent above the kitchen, weaving faintly up the staircase where Lila sat coloring. The girl froze, hearing fragments. "He doesn't suspect. A little more time." Her pencil stilled. Rebecca laughed quietly into the phone, the kind of laugh people used when they didn't have to pretend. "Of course I miss you. It's complicated right now, but it'll work out." The line clicked off. Rebecca's face changed instantly, smile gone, expression unreadable. She turned, and for a moment thought she saw movement upstairs. "Lila?" she called, her tone sweet but sharp. "Come here, honey." Lila hesitated before stepping into view, clutching her notebook against her chest. "Were you listening?" Rebecca asked softly. The girl shook her head. "No, ma'am." Rebecca walked up the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. She stopped right in front of Lila, lowering herself to the girl's height. "You know what happens when people lie, don't you?" Lila's lip trembled. "I wasn't." Rebecca smiled and touched her cheek lightly. "Good, because lies make the air ugly, and we like beautiful air, don't we?" She rose, turning gracefully toward the living room, leaving the child frozen in place. When Ethan returned home that evening, Lila tried to speak, to tell him about the phone call, but Rebecca was already there, arms around him, whispering, "Rough day. You look exhausted." She poured him wine before he could answer. During dinner, Rebecca chatted about the town's upcoming charity gala and how she planned to redecorate Ethan's office. Lila pushed her peas around her plate. "Dad," she said quietly, Can we go to the park this weekend? Maybe, Ethan said absently, scrolling through a text from the station. Rebecca smiled. Actually, sweetheart, your father's schedule is very tight. Maybe I can take you somewhere instead, a painting class or something calm. Lila's shoulders slumped. I like the park, she murmured. Rebecca set down her glass. The park's muddy this time of year, she said sweetly. You'll thank me later. Ethan, distracted by another message, didn't notice the hurt flicker across his daughter's face. But Ranger did. Beneath the table, the dog rested his head on her knee, as if to say, I'm still here. After dinner, Rebecca insisted on cleaning up alone. Ethan went to his study, leaving Lila curled up on the couch. She could hear Rebecca humming faintly, her footsteps gliding across the tile. Then the hum stopped. A moment later, Rebecca appeared in the doorway, holding Lila's notebook. You left this in the hallway, she said lightly. Lila froze. Rebecca opened it, flipping through the pages. Ah, so many drawings. You're very talented. Her voice was honey smooth, but something darker hid beneath it. She paused on a page that showed 3 figures, Ethan, Lila, and Ranger, under a bright sun. Rebecca's figure was missing. Her eyes lifted slowly. You forgot someone, she said softly. Lila's hands fidgeted. I didn't finish yet. Rebecca studied her for a long moment, then smiled again. That's all right. Just remember, families are whole when everyone's in the picture. When she left, Lila tore the page out and tucked it under Ranger's paw. The dog nosed it gently, pushing it closer to her, as though to say, don't let her take it away too. That night, after the house went dark, Ethan sat alone in his office, going through old case files. A storm gathered outside, wind howling through the pines. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his partner, Officer Dean Miller, a rugged man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weariness only years on the job could bring. Heard some noise reports near your property, Dean wrote. Probably nothing, but keep your radio close. Ethan frowned, glancing toward the window. The forest outside was a wall of shadows. Upstairs, Lila lay awake, listening to the rain begin again. She could hear footsteps in the hall, soft, slow, deliberate. Ranger stood, his fur bristling, ears perked toward the sound. The steps stopped right outside her door. Then came a faint creak, like a hand testing the handle. Lila held her breath. The door never opened. Only silence followed. But that silence felt heavier than noise. And somewhere downstairs, Rebecca's reflection flickered briefly in the black window. Glass, smiling at nothing at all. The morning after the storm, Pine Hollow looked washed clean, the forest glistening under a pale winter sun. But inside the coal house, the air remained thick, unmoving, as though it refused to forget the night before. The faint smell of wet wood lingered in the hallway, blending with the scent of lavender that never seemed to fade. Lila woke early, the rain still whispering faintly against the roof. She reached out, feeling Ranger's warm fur beneath her hand. The dog stirred, yawned softly, and rested his head on her chest, his amber eyes watching the door as if expecting something to happen. Downstairs, Rebecca's voice carried through the kitchen, soft, melodic, but too measured to sound natural. She hummed while preparing breakfast, her rhythm precise, almost mechanical. Her hair was pinned up in a tight knot, her white blouse immaculate despite the morning's chill. To anyone else, she might have looked like the perfect wife, serene and capable. But to those who lingered too long in her presence, there was something unsettling in her stillness, as if every smile were drawn carefully to disguise the absence beneath. Ethan descended the stairs wearing his uniform, buttoning the cuff of his sleeve. "You're up early," he said, glancing toward the window. Rebecca smiled. "Habit," she replied. "Old housewife's instinct. The world feels quieter before people start making mistakes." He chuckled softly, not catching the undertone. Lila came down moments later, holding her sketchbook close to her chest. "Morning, sweetheart," Ethan said, crouching to kiss her forehead. "Everything okay?" She nodded but didn't meet his eyes. Ranger followed behind, tail low, his gaze flicking briefly toward Rebecca before lying down near the doorway. As they sat for breakfast, Rebecca slid a small envelope across the table. "It's for Lila's school," she said smoothly. Permission slips, uniform sizes, all sorted. I'll handle it from here. Ethan looked grateful. You're incredible, you know that? She smiled modestly. Just doing my part. Lila's toast grew cold as she listened to them talk about errands and bills and the upcoming police charity dinner. None of it sounded real. When Ethan left for work, Rebecca closed the door behind him and stood for a long moment, watching the road disappear into mist. Then her expression shifted, softness melting into something brittle and sharp. She turned to Lila. We have a busy day ahead, she said, her tone bright but hollow. There's too much clutter in this house. Lila followed her reluctantly as Rebecca moved from room to room, her voice calm but commanding. Clutter, Rebecca explained, keeps people stuck in the past. Your father has been stuck long enough. She began packing away photo frames, trinkets, drawings, each piece of memory vanishing into cardboard boxes marked storage. When she reached Grace's old room, she paused at the locked door. The brass handle gleamed faintly in the morning light. Rebecca rested her hand on it, tilting her head as if listening to something. Why is it locked? Lila asked softly. Rebecca looked over her shoulder, her eyes unreadable. Because some doors don't lead anywhere worth going. But it was Mom's room, Lila whispered. Rebecca's lips tightened, though her smile didn't fade. Then it's time to stop pretending she'll walk out of it. Lila's fingers curled around her sketchbook. She won't stop being my mom. Rebecca turned fully now, kneeling so they were eye to eye. Her tone was sweet, but her gaze gleamed like glass. No one said she would, but you need to learn how to live with what's gone. Understand? Lila didn't answer. She turned and ran down the hall, Ranger padding after her. Rebecca straightened, watching the girl vanish around the corner. Her reflection in the doorknob distorted her face slightly, just enough to make it look like someone else's. Around noon, Linda arrived through the back door, shaking off her umbrella. Morning, Mrs. Hale, she greeted softly. Her cheeks were ruddy from the cold, and strands of gray hair framed her face. She had baked a small apple pie, the crust imperfect but golden. Thought I'd bring a little comfort food. This weather makes me think of Grace's old recipe. Rebecca's eyes flickered, but she smiled politely. That's thoughtful, Linda, though we're cutting down on sweets. Linda hesitated, her hand tightening on the dish. It's just pie, ma'am. Miss Lila used to love— I said, Rebecca interrupted gently, we're cutting down. The words were soft, but they carried an unmistakable finality. Linda set the pie down and stepped back, her eyes shifting to Lila, who stood silently in the doorway. Ranger brushed against the child's leg, tail still. Linda offered a faint, comforting smile. You all right, sweetheart? Lila nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, ma'am. Rebecca's smile returned, the conversation sealed under the weight of politeness. That evening, the wind rose again, whistling through the eaves. Ethan worked late at the precinct, leaving the house dim except for the flicker of the living room lamp. Rebecca stood at her vanity, combing her hair, humming softly. Lila sat by the stairs with Ranger, sketching quietly by the faint light from the hall. She drew her mother's face from memory, gentle eyes, a smile that felt like sunlight. But when she looked up, she saw Rebecca watching her from the doorway. What are you drawing, darling? Lila froze. Nothing. Rebecca stepped closer, her perfume filling the air, lavender laced with something metallic beneath. Let me see. Lila clutched the sketchbook to her chest. It's mine. Rebecca tilted her head, her tone still calm but lower now. Sweetheart, you don't hide things from family. When Lila didn't move, Rebecca sighed softly, took a step back, and smiled. Fine. Keep your secrets. But secrets have a way of turning ugly in the dark. That night, after dinner, Rebecca poured herself a glass of wine and stared at the locked room upstairs. The key glinted against her skin as she held it. She looked down the hall where Lila's light still burned. For a moment, her expression wavered. Not anger, not sorrow, but something deeper, harder to name. Then she walked to the room, inserted the key, and turned it halfway before stopping. Slowly, she locked it again, slipped the key into her pocket, and walked away. Later, as the house fell silent, Lila crept out of bed. Ranger followed close behind, his nails tapping faintly against the floor. She carried a small flashlight and the sketchbook, her heart pounding as she reached the forbidden door. The handle was cold, locked, but from beneath the door a faint scent drifted out, familiar, like her mother's perfume, rose and cedarwood. Lila knelt, pressing her hand against the wood. "Mom," she whispered. Ranger whined low, nuzzling her arm. The hallway was silent except for the wind outside. Then, a faint clink, the sound of metal. Lila stiffened. From behind her, a shadow moved. "Lila?" Rebecca's voice, soft and sharp at once. The girl spun around, the flashlight shaking in her hand. "I just wanted to—" Rebecca's face was calm, almost serene. "You wanted to what?" "I wanted to remember her," Lila said, trembling. Rebecca stepped closer. "That's not remembering. That's staying lost." She took the flashlight gently, knelt down, and looked into the child's eyes. "I know it hurts," she whispered, "but hurting doesn't bring anyone back." Her hand lingered on the door handle before she stood, her tone firm now. "Go to your room." When Lila didn't move, Rebecca added softly, "If you can't stop looking back, I'll help you." She reached for the door once more, locked it with a final click, and slipped the key into her pocket. The sound echoed down the hall, sharp as a commandment. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She ran to her room, Ranger following, growling low as he passed Rebecca. The woman didn't flinch. She watched them go, then turned off the hallway light, leaving the house swallowed by darkness. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender and something else beneath, like rusted iron. Upstairs, Lila cried quietly into Ranger's fur, whispering. She locked Mom away again. The dog pressed his nose to her cheek, his breath warm and steady. Somewhere below, the last sound before sleep took her was the clink of that key, sliding back into Rebecca's drawer. The storm that arrived that night was unlike any Ethan had seen in years. Rain lashed the windows of the Pine Hollow house like 1,000 tiny fists, and the wind howled through the trees, bending the pines as if trying to uproot them from the earth. The electricity flickered several times before dying altogether, leaving the house in shadow lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. Ethan had been called to the outskirts of town, where a landslide had blocked a rural road, and Rebecca insisted she and Lila would be fine at home. "We'll light a few candles," she had said with a soft smile, "and make it cozy." But nothing about that house ever felt cozy anymore. By the time Ethan's patrol car disappeared into the storm, Rebecca was already pacing the living room, her shadow moving across the walls like a restless ghost. The wind rattled the old windows, and Ranger sat near the stairs, muscles taut, ears twitching toward every sound. Lila sat curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her, sketchbook open on her knees. "Can I draw Mom tonight?" she asked quietly. Rebecca turned sharply, though her tone remained calm. "It's late. You should draw something happy. Maybe the storm, or the trees." "But I miss her," Lila murmured, looking down. Rebecca exhaled slowly, the flicker of candlelight catching on her eyes. "Missing people doesn't bring them back, sweetheart." She turned away before the child could respond, her voice trailing like smoke. "It just makes you forget the ones who stayed." Ranger stood up suddenly, tail stiff, head turning toward the stairs. His growl was low, almost inaudible, but it made Lila look up. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. He padded a few steps forward, nose twitching, eyes fixed on the hallway beyond the staircase. There was a sound, a faint thump, distant and muffled, as if something had shifted inside the walls. Rebecca's gaze followed his, and for a heartbeat, she froze. Then she smiled faintly. "Old house," she said. "Wood expands in the rain." But even as she said it, the sound came again, soft, rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. Lila slid off the couch. "It's coming from Mom's room." Rebecca's face hardened. "Don't start that again." "I heard it," Lila insisted. "It's like she's calling." "That's enough." The sharpness in Rebecca's voice cut through the dark, startling even herself. She pressed her fingers to her temple, forcing her tone softer. "Go to bed, Lila. Now." Lila hesitated, but Ranger growled again, this time louder. Rebecca glared at the dog. "Quiet." When the growl didn't stop, she took a step forward, and Ranger bared his teeth, a deep rumble rising from his chest. Lila threw her arms around his neck, crying, "Stop it! Please!" Rebecca turned away, her breath unsteady. "Upstairs, both of you." Lila obeyed, clutching Ranger's collar as they climbed the stairs in the dark. The thunder cracked outside, shaking the windows. When she reached her room, she turned to close the door, but Rebecca was still standing below, looking up at her. For a moment, their eyes met through the flickering candlelight, and Lila thought she saw something in her stepmother's face she couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Then Rebecca blew out the candle, and the hallway fell into darkness. Hours passed. The storm deepened. Lila couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed with Ranger beside her, listening to the wind, the rain, the creak of the house. Then faintly, she heard it again. The sound, the same one as before. Thump, thump. A soft scraping, like nails against wood. "Ranger," she whispered. "It's her. It has to be." The dog whined, pressing closer. Lila took her flashlight from the nightstand and crept into the hallway. The beam wavered across the walls, illuminating the portraits Rebecca had hung, perfectly aligned, soulless. When she reached the end of the hall, she saw the locked door. The scent of lavender drifted faintly from beneath it, mixed now with something damp and cold. She knelt, pressing her ear against the wood. "Mom?" she whispered. No answer, just another soft thump. Her small fingers reached for the handle. It turned slightly, but stopped, locked. She tried again, tears welling in her eyes. "Please." Then, suddenly, footsteps behind her. The flashlight flickered across the floor and revealed Rebecca's shadow stretching long across the wall. "What do you think you're doing?" Lila froze. Rebecca's face emerged from the dark, pale, unreadable, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" "I heard something," Lila stammered. "It came from here." Rebecca's eyes flicked to the door, then back. "Your imagination is playing tricks," Ranger growled again, stepping between them. For a brief moment, something raw passed across Rebecca's expression, a flash of anger, quickly smothered by calm. "Fine," she said quietly. "If you won't sleep, then maybe you should stay somewhere you can think." Before Lila could react, Rebecca opened the narrow cellar door near the stairs, a small, unused storage space beneath the house. It smelled of damp earth and old wine. "Go inside," she said softly. Lila's voice trembled. "I don't want to." Rebecca's smile was paper-thin. "Then you shouldn't have lied about the noises." She pushed the girl gently but firmly inside, shutting the door. A click followed, the lock sliding into place. Darkness swallowed everything. Inside the cellar, Lila clutched Ranger's fur, her heart pounding. The dog barked and scratched at the wood, his claws thudding against the door. Outside, Rebecca leaned her forehead against the frame, breathing heavily. For the first time, her perfect composure cracked. "Stop barking," she whispered, though the dog didn't stop. "You'll wake the whole world." When Ranger's barking grew louder, she snapped. "Enough!" She turned away, her shadow retreating down the hall, leaving the cellar trembling under the echo of thunder. Inside, Lila buried her face in Ranger's neck, whispering, "It's okay. Dad will come. He'll come." And miles away, driving through the storm, Ethan's radio crackled. Static hissed between words before a faint voice broke through. The local dispatcher. "Unit 14, do you copy? We've got a neighbor reporting unusual noise near your property. Possible domestic disturbance." Ethan's gut tightened. "Copy that. I'm en route." Rain hammered his windshield as he turned the car around, headlights cutting through sheets of water. The drive back to Pine Hollow was long and winding, but his instincts screamed at him. Something was wrong. When he finally reached the house, the porch light was out, and the windows glowed faintly from candlelight within. He killed the engine, stepped out, and drew a long breath before knocking. "Rebecca." No answer. "Rebecca, it's me." He tried the door. It opened easily. Inside, the air was still. The storm's roar dulled to a murmur behind the walls. He called again. "Lila?" Then came a sound, a faint whimper, barely audible. Ranger's bark followed, muffled but desperate. Ethan's pulse surged. He followed the noise toward the cellar door, dropped to his knees, and tried the handle. Locked. "Hold on!" he shouted, slamming his shoulder against the wood. It gave way on the second strike. The door flew open, revealing his daughter curled up on the floor, covered in dust, eyes wide with terror. Ranger stood protectively over her, growling at the light. "Dad!" she cried, throwing herself into his arms. "She locked me in. Ethan pulled her close, his heart pounding. "It's okay. You're safe now." Behind him, footsteps. He turned sharply. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her face pale, hair disheveled, eyes wide with shock, or something like it. "Ethan, wait. It's not what you think," she said, voice trembling. She was panicking. I just wanted her to calm down." Ethan's stare was cold. "You locked a child in a cellar." Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed again. "I didn't mean to." He stepped forward. "Don't." His voice cracked like thunder. "Don't say another word." The distant sound of sirens pierced through the storm, growing closer. Rebecca's eyes filled with panic. "You called them?" "I didn't have to," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "The neighbors did." As the flashing blue lights filled the window, Rebecca sank to her knees, whispering, "I was only trying to help her." Ethan looked down at his daughter, trembling in his arms, her small hand gripping Ranger's fur. "You've done enough," he said quietly. When the officers entered, Rebecca didn't resist. The last thing she saw as they led her outside was Ethan kneeling on the floor, holding Lila close while Ranger rested beside them, his chest rising and falling in calm, steady rhythm. Outside, the storm began to break. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the town of Pine Hollow shrouded in a pale gray calm. The roads were slick with rain, the trees bowed under the weight of water, and a heavy stillness hung in the air like the echo of something broken. Inside the coal house, the faint smell of smoke and wet earth lingered, mingling with the sharp trace of fear that hadn't yet dissipated. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the half-empty glass of water in his hands. His uniform was still damp from the rain, his eyes red and sleepless. Across from him, Lila lay wrapped in a thick blanket, her head resting on Ranger's side. The German shepherd had refused to move all night, watching every shadow that shifted near her. Rebecca was gone. The police had taken her before sunrise, after she'd spent an hour in silence at the kitchen table. She hadn't cried, hadn't screamed. She simply looked at Ethan once, her voice calm when she said, "You'll see I was only trying to protect her." Then she was escorted into the back of the patrol car and disappeared into the gray morning. Now, only the three of them remained: the father, the daughter, and the dog who never slept. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Ethan stood slowly, rubbing his eyes before opening it. Standing on the porch was Dr. Evelyn Harper, a woman in her early 40s, tall and graceful with sharp, kind eyes behind thin glasses. Her dark brown hair was tied in a low ponytail, a few loose strands curling around her face. She wore a long beige coat, the cuffs still damp from the rain, and carried a folder under her arm. Evelyn had the air of someone who had seen too much pain and learned to speak softly because of it. She was a trauma psychologist working with the department and had been assigned to check on Lila. "Officer Cole," she greeted, her voice calm but edged with quiet empathy. "They called me this morning. May I come in?" Ethan nodded wordlessly. Inside, Evelyn knelt beside Lila, her movements gentle, deliberate. "Hi, Lila," she said with a soft smile. "I'm Evelyn. You don't have to talk to me yet. I'm just here to make sure you're okay." Lila peeked from behind Ranger's fur, her eyes still swollen from crying. She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Ranger sniffed Evelyn's hand, then laid his head back down as if deciding she was safe. Evelyn straightened, turning to Ethan. "She's exhausted, but she's safe. That's what matters right now." Her voice dropped. "What about you?" Ethan gave a tired half smile. "I've been better." "I can imagine." Evelyn hesitated, then added, "You did the right thing calling it in. She'll get a fair evaluation, though I expect Rebecca's version will sound different." "She said she was protecting my daughter," Ethan murmured bitterly. "From what, love?" Evelyn's eyes softened. People, like that, don't protect. They possess. It's about control. Ethan looked away, jaw tightening. I should have seen it sooner. You can't fix what you don't know is broken, she said, but you can stop it from happening again. Later that morning, Linda arrived. Her usual calm face was pale, lips pressed thin with anger. She wore her simple wool coat, damp around the hem, and carried a grocery bag filled with soup and bread. Lord have mercy, she whispered when she saw Lila asleep on the couch. She looked at Ethan, her voice trembling. I thought that woman was strange, but I never imagined she'd do this. Ethan rubbed his forehead. None of us did. Linda knelt to tuck the blanket tighter around Lila. Poor child, she murmured. Even in sleep, she looks afraid. Ranger's tail thumped once against the rug, his gaze steady on Linda's face as if approving her presence. By afternoon, the house had begun to feel less like a battlefield and more like a recovery room. The power returned, the rain faded to drizzle, and sunlight peeked weakly through the clouds. Ethan tried to clean up, the broken latch on the cellar door, the overturned candle, but everywhere he looked reminded him of the night before, the hallway where Rebecca had stood watching him, the locked door that no longer seemed to guard anything except pain. As he worked, Evelyn joined him quietly. Lila's awake, she said. She asked for you. He followed her to the couch, where Lila sat with a mug of warm milk. Her eyes were clearer now, though still distant. Dad? She whispered. I'm here, sweetheart, he said, kneeling beside her. Is she coming back? Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. No, she's not. Lila's lip trembled. Did I do something bad? The question hit him like a knife. No, he said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. You did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault. Ranger rested his head on Ethan's leg, sighing softly. For the first time since the storm, Ethan felt something inside him break, not from anger, but from release. That night, after Linda and Evelyn left, Ethan sat by the window while Lila slept upstairs. The moonlight fell in narrow stripes across the floor. Ranger lay at his feet, eyes half open but alert as always. Ethan stared out at the trees, their dark silhouettes swaying gently in the wind. The quiet felt foreign, like a language he no longer understood. The front door creaked softly, and he turned to see Dean Miller, his longtime partner, step inside. Dean was a broad man in his mid-40s, gray dusting his hair and beard. His uniform jacket was still wet from patrol, but his expression carried the weariness of someone who had seen too much of the world's ugliness. I heard, Dean said simply, setting his cap on the table. Whole department did. You holding up? Ethan nodded faintly. As much as I can. Dean's eyes drifted to the staircase. She okay? She will be, Ethan said. Eventually. Dean sighed. You did everything right, man. Don't start blaming yourself. Ethan gave a humorless laugh. That's all I know how to do. They stood in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the clock. Then Dean reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Child Services is moving quick on this case, but Harper's report is good, says the girl's resilient, like her dad. Ethan nodded, though his throat tightened. I'll make sure she never feels unsafe again. Dean put a hand on his shoulder. You already started. When Dean left, the house was quiet again. Ethan locked the doors, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs. In the dim hallway, he paused outside Grace's old room. The lock hung broken, the door slightly ajar from when the officers had searched the house. He pushed it open gently. Inside, the air was cold but clean. The moonlight revealed dust dancing in the air, and on the dresser sat a faded photo of Grace and Lila, one he thought Rebecca had thrown away. He picked it up, tracing his fingers over Grace's smile. You'd know what to say right now, he whispered. You always did. Ranger padded in, sitting beside him, eyes fixed on the photograph as if he, too, remembered. Ethan looked down at the dog. We're still here, boy, he murmured, and we're not going anywhere. He left the photo on the dresser, turned off the light, and closed the door. Not to forget, but to let it rest. Down the hall, he peeked into Lila's room. She was asleep, her face calm for the first time in days, one small hand resting on Ranger's paw. He stood there a long time, the weight of guilt slowly giving way to something fragile but real. Hope. Outside, the night was still. The rain had finally stopped, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan thought he could hear the forest breathing again. The morning after Rebecca's arrest was the first one in months that began with birdsong instead of tension. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, soft and golden, painting gentle patterns across the hardwood floor of the old house. The silence inside was no longer oppressive. It was fragile, hesitant, like the first breath after a long night of holding it in. Ethan stood by the window with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the mist lift slowly from the forest outside. His uniform hung neatly on the chair beside him, though he had no intention of wearing it that day. For the first time in years, his duty wasn't to the badge, but to his daughter. Upstairs, Lila stirred in bed. The light touched her face, and she blinked awake to see Ranger lying beside her, his chest rising and falling steadily. The German shepherd's fur caught the morning light, revealing the faint streaks of silver around his muzzle, a sign of his years of loyal service. He was nearly 6 now, with scars hidden beneath the thick tan and black coat, each one earned in some forgotten patrol. His amber eyes followed every movement she made, as if guarding her even in the quiet. "Good morning, Ranger," she whispered, stroking his head. He licked her hand once, tail thumping softly. The sound was comfort itself. When she came downstairs, Ethan was setting 2 plates on the table, scrambled eggs, toast, and the smallest hint of burned bacon. He looked up, smiled awkwardly. "Tried not to ruin breakfast this time." Lila giggled faintly, a sound that caught him off guard. It had been so long since he'd heard it. "It's okay if it's burnt," she said. "Mom used to burn toast all the time." Ethan froze, then laughed softly. "Guess it runs in the family." As they ate, there was an easy quiet between them, broken only by the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. But beneath that stillness lay something unspoken, the need to rebuild trust from the ashes of fear. After breakfast, Ethan suggested a walk. "The storm took down some branches on the back trail," he said. "Want to help me clear them?" Lila hesitated. "The woods?" He nodded gently. "Just the edge. I won't let you out of my sight, I promise." She looked at Ranger, who wagged his tail as if giving his approval. "Okay," she said finally. The forest smelled of pine and rain. Patches of sunlight slipped through the canopy, dappling the muddy path. Lila walked between Ethan and Ranger, her small boots crunching leaves. Every so often she reached out to hold Ethan's hand, then let go again, as if testing the distance. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. The wind did the talking for them, whispering through the trees that life still moved forward. At the bend of the trail, they met Martha Reynolds, a middle-aged woman who owned the property next door. She was tall and sturdy, with sun-warmed skin and the kind of strength that came from years of hard work on her small horse farm. Martha had sharp green eyes that could read a man before he spoke, and a habit of calling everyone darlin', in a tone that could either soothe or scold. "Morning, Ethan," she greeted, pushing her straw hat back. "Heard what happened last night. Lord above, you must be worn to the bone." Ethan gave a tired nod. "It's been a long few days." Martha glanced at Lila and smiled kindly. "And you must be the brave little lady I keep hearing about." Lila shuffled behind Ranger, shy but curious. "Hi," she murmured. "You've got good company there," Martha said, nodding toward the dog. "German shepherds don't follow just anyone. They follow hearts that don't lie." Lila managed a small smile, and Martha winked. "If you two ever need a change of air, come by the farm. I've got horses that love kids, and one old mare who's probably lazier than me." Ethan smiled. "Thank you, Martha. We might take you up on that." As they walked home, Lila asked, "Dad, can we really visit her horses?" "Of course," he said. "Maybe this weekend." That simple promise seemed to brighten her face more than any sunlight could. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove Lila into town to meet Dr. Evelyn Harper again for her follow-up session. The therapy office sat above a bakery, the air filled with the sweet scent of cinnamon and fresh bread. Inside, Evelyn's space was painted in soft tones, sage green walls, a wooden desk covered with seashells and tiny carved animals. A gold-framed photograph of her own son rested by the window. Evelyn smiled warmly when they arrived. "Come on in, both of you." She turned to Lila. "You can draw again today if you'd like, or we can talk about Ranger." "Can I draw him and Mom together?" Lila asked. Evelyn nodded. "That sounds perfect." While Lila sketched quietly, Ethan and Evelyn spoke near the window. "She's improving," Evelyn said in a low voice. "Still jumpy, but the nightmares are fading. Having Ranger near her helps, a constant source of safety." Ethan glanced at his daughter. "I don't know what we'd do without him." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Dogs have a way of healing us when words can't. Sometimes they carry the weight we can't bear ourselves." When the session ended, Lila handed her drawing to her father. It showed a field under a blue sky, her mother, smiling, with Ranger sitting beside her. Behind them stood a man holding a child's hand. Ethan looked at the small words she'd written at the bottom. "We're together now." The drive home was quiet except for the soft hum of the radio. The sky had begun to clear completely, revealing streaks of pale orange and rose at the horizon. That evening, as darkness settled, Ethan fixed the hallway light that had been flickering for weeks. Lila stood beside him, holding the flashlight. When the bulb finally came to life, the golden light spilled across the corridor, warm and steady. "There," he said softly. "No more dark corners." Lila looked up at him, her eyes wide and earnest. "Does that mean the house won't be scary anymore?" Ethan crouched down, meeting her gaze. "It might still creak. The wind might still blow, but you'll never have to face it alone again." Ranger barked once, tail wagging, as if sealing the promise. Before bedtime, Lila knelt beside the bed, her small voice whispering a prayer, something about her mom and light and not being afraid. When she finished, she looked toward the open doorway where Ethan stood. "Dad," she said softly, "can we leave the hallway light on tonight?" He smiled. "Of course, sweetheart." And so the light stayed on, glowing gently through the night. It reached into every corner, casting no harsh shadows, only warmth, only peace. Ethan watched from the doorway as Lila drifted to sleep with Ranger curled beside her, the faint rhythm of waves of breath filling the room like a lullaby. Downstairs, Ethan sat with a cup of tea, staring at the soft pool of light spilling from the stairwell. It reminded him of Grace, her laughter, her warmth, the way she used to hum while making breakfast. For the first time in years, the memory didn't hurt. It simply existed, gentle and whole. He reached for his phone and opened an email draft addressed to Dr. Harper. He typed a few words. "Thank you for helping us find our way back." Then he paused, backspaced, and simply wrote, "We're okay." He set the phone aside, looked toward the quiet house, and whispered to the stillness, "We're home again." Outside, the moon rose slowly over Pine Hollow, washing the valley in silver. The storm had left its mark, but from the cracks in the clouds, the first stars shone through, small, steady lights that promised dawn would always come again. 2 weeks had passed since the storm, and life in Pine Hollow had begun to settle into a rhythm so gentle it almost felt like peace. Morning sunlight now streamed warmly through the kitchen windows, carrying with it the scent of brewed coffee, toasted bread, and occasionally wet fur, because Ranger had decided his favorite spot was right beside the back door after his morning patrol of the yard. Ethan no longer woke to the sound of nightmares or the creak of fear in the hallways. He woke to the clatter of dishes, to the quiet hum of his daughter's voice talking softly to the dog, and to the small sound of healing. Lila sat at the kitchen table, dressed in a pale yellow sweater and jeans, slightly too big for her, her hair pulled into a loose braid. Her cheeks, once hollowed by worry, had regained their color. She was focused on the small project spread before her, a cardboard box covered in drawings of stars and waves, a few seashells glued along the edges. "It's for Dr. Harper," she said when Ethan asked what she was making. "She said every story needs a place to live, so I'm building one for ours." Ethan smiled faintly, rinsing his cup. "I think she'll love it." Outside, the world glowed with early autumn's colors, rusted golds, fading greens, and the faint promise of winter beyond the ridge. The air smelled of pine and earth. It was the kind of morning that whispered second chances. Later that day, they drove into town together. Ethan, back in uniform for the first time in days, felt the weight of his badge again, but it wasn't the same kind of weight. This time, it wasn't duty pressing on him, but purpose. Beside him, Lila hummed quietly to the radio, Ranger's head resting between the seats. Their first stop was the Pine Hollow Elementary School. Lila had missed nearly a month, and though Ethan worried she might not be ready, she had insisted on going back. "I'm not scared anymore," she said that morning. "If I get scared, Ranger will remember the way home." The school sat on a gentle hill overlooking the river, surrounded by maple trees already shedding their leaves. Principal Janet Cole, a kindly woman in her late 50s with silver hair and round glasses, met them at the front steps. She had known Ethan since he was a teenager. Her voice was as steady and reassuring as the town's church bell. "Officer Cole," she greeted warmly, shaking his hand. "And you must be Lila. We've missed you, sweetheart." Lila managed a shy smile. Principal Cole crouched to her level, her tone gentle but deliberate. "This is a safe place. You don't have to talk about what happened unless you want to, all right? We're just happy you're here." Lila nodded, clutching the small seashell necklace she wore, a gift Ethan had given her the day after the storm. "Okay." Inside the classroom, children chattered and laughed. Some glanced curiously when Lila entered, but a freckled girl named Sophie Parker, about the same age, waved her over. Sophie was bright and outspoken, with curls that refused to be tamed and an infectious laugh that made even the quietest students smile. "You can sit with me," she said confidently. "I'll tell you which lunches are good and which are suspicious." That broke the ice. Within minutes, Lila was giggling softly as Sophie described the cafeteria's mystery meat, like a war story. Ethan stood at the doorway for a long moment, his throat tight, watching his daughter find her way back to laughter. When the bell rang, he left the building, stepping into the crisp air. The sound of children's voices echoed behind him, a sound he realized he hadn't truly heard in years. That afternoon, he returned to the police station for the first time since the arrest. His partner, Dean Miller, was there, seated behind a cluttered desk covered with paperwork and an oversized mug that read, "World's Okayest Cop." Dean looked up, grinning. "Well, look who decided to rejoin the living." Ethan smirked. "I figured you'd be lost without me." Dean leaned back, arms crossed. "Lost? Nah, bored maybe. Things have been quiet since that night. You did good, Ethan. Took guts to stand your ground." Ethan sat, glancing at the stack of reports on his desk. "It didn't feel like guts. It felt like failing too late." Dean shook his head. "No, it was the opposite. You saved that girl's life, and your own, if you ask me." Before Ethan could reply, a knock came at the door. Dr. Evelyn Harper stepped in, holding a thin file. Today, she wore a navy blue coat and simple gold earrings that caught the afternoon light. "Gentlemen," she greeted, "I was just dropping off Lila's follow-up evaluation. She's doing remarkably well. I wanted to thank you, Officer Cole, for your cooperation." Ethan smiled, standing. "No need to thank me. You've done more for her than anyone." Evelyn's eyes softened. Sometimes, all a child needs is someone who listens. Dean, sensing the quiet between them, chuckled and rose. "I'll go check on the patrol logs. Don't let the paperwork eat you alive, Cole." Then he disappeared through the hallway. Evelyn lingered. "How are you doing, Ethan?" He hesitated, rubbing his neck. "Trying to remember how to be a father before being an officer." "That's a good start," she said, smiling. "I think you're doing better than you realize." When she left, Ethan found himself staring at the empty doorway for a long time. Maybe she was right. That evening, after picking Lila up from school, they stopped by Martha Reynolds's horse farm. The air was filled with the earthy scent of hay and the sweet sound of hooves on soil. Lila's laughter rang across the field as Martha guided her onto a gentle chestnut mare named Belle, who was old enough to know when to walk slow. "You've got natural balance, kiddo," Martha called. "She trusts you." Ethan leaned against the fence, watching, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Ranger trotted beside him, tail wagging, occasionally barking encouragement at the horse as if supervising. As the sun dipped below the ridge, the sky turned into a canvas of lavender and gold. They stayed until twilight, when the cicadas began their song. That night, back home, Lila placed her finished cardboard box on the living room table. Ethan noticed she had written 3 words across the lid in blue marker. Voice beneath the floor. "What's that mean?" he asked. She smiled softly. "It's what Dr. Harper said. When someone's scared for too long, their voice hides under the floor, but if someone listens, it comes back." Ethan swallowed hard, his voice rough. "That's beautiful." Lila opened the box. Inside were small drawings, her mother smiling, Ranger watching over her, and her father standing beside them both. At the bottom lay a folded note that read, "We're safe now." Ranger nudged Ethan's hand, tail brushing gently against Lila's leg. Ethan reached down to scratch behind his ear. "You've kept us together, haven't you, old boy?" The dog gave a quiet huff, as if acknowledging the truth. Later, when Lila had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone in the living room, the cardboard box before him. The flickering firelight made the drawings seem alive, like ghosts transformed into memories instead of pain. He thought of the night in the cellar, of the fear in his daughter's eyes, and of the sound he hadn't recognized then, the soft thump from beneath the floor, the sound of a child trying to be heard. He took a slow breath, looked up at the photo of Grace still on the mantel, and whispered, "I'm listening now." Outside, the first chill of autumn swept through the pines, but the light in the hallway remained on, steady, golden, unyielding. The first snow of winter came quietly to Pine Hollow, soft and slow, as though the sky itself had decided to forgive. The town was bathed in white, every rooftop shimmering with frost, every branch bending under the gentle weight of new beginnings. Inside the coal house, the scent of pine and cinnamon lingered. A small Christmas tree stood by the window, trimmed not with luxury ornaments, but with seashells, paper stars, and little drawings made by Lila. On the highest branch, just beneath the silver star, hung a tiny wooden dog figurine Ethan had carved himself. It didn't look much like Ranger, but Lila had insisted it was perfect. Ethan stood at the counter, wrapping gifts in brown paper. His hands were clumsy, the tape uneven, but his heart was light. He had grown used to the warmth of quiet moments, Lila humming to herself while Ranger dozed near the fireplace, the ticking clock echoing softly through the hall. They were small things, but they filled the house with life again. Lila came running in, her boots squeaking on the floor. "Dad, snow's thick enough. We can go now." Ethan grinned. "Coats first. You'll freeze before we reach the car." Ranger barked as if to second that command, tail wagging eagerly. His muzzle had grown whiter these past weeks, but his energy hadn't faded. If anything, he seemed younger, each morning meeting the day like it was another chance to guard his family. They loaded into the truck, with Ranger squeezed between them, tongue hanging out, fogging the glass. Their destination lay 30 miles away, the coast, where Grace used to take them every winter before she passed. Lila had asked to visit again, "So Mom can see how much braver I am now." Ethan couldn't say no to that. The drive wound through forests dusted with snow, past frozen streams and quiet fields. Lila pressed her face against the window, watching the world blur by like a dream. "Do you think Mom liked the ocean this much when she was little?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "She grew up near it, said it was the only place that ever answered back when she talked." Lila turned, thoughtful. "Like how Ranger listens." He nodded. "Exactly like that." When they reached the shore, the sky had cleared. The ocean stretched wide and endless, its surface glittering beneath the pale winter sun. Waves rolled gently, whispering against the rocks, and the cold air carried the faint tang of salt. Lila jumped out first, her boots sinking into the soft sand, laughter bursting free in little clouds of mist. Ranger followed close, his paws leaving a trail beside hers. Ethan stood for a long moment, watching them, the wind tugging at his scarf. There, beneath the open sky, he saw something he hadn't seen in years, a vision of peace, not imagined, but real. They spent the afternoon walking along the shoreline. Lila collected seashells again, her pockets soon bulging with them. She paused when she found one shaped like a heart and ran to Ethan, holding it up proudly. "Look, just like the one we found before." He crouched to her level. "Maybe the ocean remembers us." Ranger barked once and chased a gull that swooped too close, sand spraying from his paws. His reflection shimmered in the tide pools, fierce and bright. Lila laughed until she nearly fell, and Ethan caught her just in time. The sound of her joy seemed to echo against the waves, bouncing back toward the horizon. As the sun began to set, they gathered driftwood near the rocks and built a small fire. The flames danced, warm against the chill. Ethan took out a small tin box. Inside were 3 folded letters. He handed one to Lila. "Do you remember what we talked about with Dr. Harper? About letting go without forgetting?" Lila nodded. "You said love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape." "That's right," Ethan said, voice low. "This is how we keep it alive." Lila unfolded her letter carefully. It was short, written in her careful, slightly uneven handwriting. "Dear Mom, I'm not scared anymore. Ranger and Dad make sure I'm safe. I hope you can see the ocean today, too." She set the letter gently into the fire, and Ethan did the same with his. The smoke rose slowly, curling upward until it vanished into the golden sky. For a while they said nothing, only watched the light flicker across the waves. Then, from behind them, a familiar voice broke the quiet. "Well, if that isn't the most beautiful picture I've seen all week." It was Martha Reynolds, wearing a red scarf and holding 2 steaming cups of cocoa. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her breath came out in little puffs of laughter. "Brought you something warm," she said. "Didn't think I'd find you this far out, but Belle needed her walk." Behind her, the old chestnut mare stood patiently, her breath misting in the air. Ethan accepted the cocoa with gratitude. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Maybe not," Martha said, eyes twinkling. "But sometimes people need company more than they admit." Lila smiled up at her. "Thank you, Miss Martha." "Any time, sugar." The 3 of them sat near the fire, sharing stories as twilight deepened. Martha spoke about her husband, long gone but still part of every decision she made on the farm. "Grief doesn't go away," she said softly. "It just teaches us where to look for love next." Ethan listened in silence, her words settling deep inside him like embers that refused to fade. When the stars appeared, bright and sharp in the clear sky, Martha mounted Belle again, tipping her hat. "Merry Christmas, darlings, and don't let that cocoa get cold. It's a sin to waste good chocolate." After she rode off, Ethan looked at Lila and smiled. "She's right, you know." Lila nodded, sipping her cocoa. "Dad? Yeah? Do you think Mom's happy now?" He followed her gaze toward the ocean, the moonlight shimmering across its surface like a silver path. "I think she is," he said quietly, "because we are." Later, as they packed up, Lila placed one of her heart-shaped shells in the sand, whispering something Ethan couldn't hear. He didn't ask. Some words were meant only for the sea. The drive home was silent except for the radio softly playing an old hymn Grace used to love. Lila fell asleep halfway, her head resting on Ranger's side. Ethan reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his chest tight with something that wasn't pain anymore. It was gratitude. When they reached home, snow had begun to fall again. The world outside looked clean, reborn. Ethan carried Lila upstairs, tucking her into bed while Ranger curled up at her feet. Before turning off the lamp, she murmured in her sleep, "I can hear her, Dad. She's singing." He smiled, whispering back, "Then let's never stop listening." Downstairs, Ethan stood by the window, watching the snow drift past the glass. The light in the hallway still burned softly, golden and constant. He thought of all they had lost, and all they had gained, not through miracles, but through patience, forgiveness, and the simple act of listening. He turned toward the mantel, where the small wooden dog and the seashell box stood side by side. He rested his hand on the box and said quietly, "We're safe now, Grace. We're home." Ranger's soft bark came from upstairs, low and content. Ethan smiled. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of the sea, gentle, eternal, and full of promise. And in that moment, beneath the snow and stars, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt whole. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with thunder or angels in the sky. They come softly, through the ones who stay, through a father who learns to listen, a child who dares to hope again, and a loyal dog who never leaves their side. In every act of forgiveness, in every moment of love that survives after loss, there is the quiet hand of God guiding us home. Let this story remind you that even after the darkest storm, His light still shines in the smallest places, in a child's laughter, in a warm home, in the peace that follows pain. If you believe that love and faith can heal the deepest wounds, share this story to bring light to others. Leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe for more stories of hope, and may God bless you and your family with peace and protection. If you feel the presence of His miracle in your heart today, comment Amen.